distributes in 10⁻⁹. So it's poised around the micromolar or nanomolar range. Based on our suggestions in our thought experiment on the zero protein, we'd expect putting this in the cytosol of E. coli, it wouldn't light up because the ambient free zinc is too low. But we're going to use this to explore compartments where free zinc might be elevated. And this is a side note again on bringing up the relevance of health. It turns out that the malaria parasite, when it invades the red blood cell, forces the concentration of zinc, and as it grows and it starts eating the interior of the red blood cells, digesting the hemoglobin, it starts pumping zinc in. And where you see green, you have an elevated concentration of free zinc. The red spots are the DNA of the growing pathogen in the red blood cell. And it creates a vacuolar network that's different from the food vacuole, it's different from the nucleus, and it's just bathed in very high concentrations of free zinc. In fact, it's such that we find that we can shut down parasitemia, the growth of the parasite, just by restricting zinc availability in the growth media. And that furthermore, many anti-malarial drugs seem to block this zinc pathophysiology. So I want to recognize a few people that have contributed to this, the beginnings of this story that I told you. Many of them are now professors at major universities around the world. I'm not going to walk you through each of them, but I'm incredibly grateful for their contributions. I want to point out my collaborator, Alfonso Mondragon, also at Northwestern, who's really helped me train several of these students in protein crystallography and getting where we were in there. Okay, so each element, I would argue, is, at least for zinc and copper, is not freely available, and so we now have ways to look at the dynamic regulation. Okay, and if there really is no free metal that is on the steady state, so there might be transient fluxes. What is it? Is there a transient flux every time a protein moves up the ribosome that needs a metallic protein? How does the right metal get to the right place in the cell? And so we've argued that there are a family of proteins called metallochaperones, and this is based on a discovery that Val Collada and I made several years ago on a protein called ATX1. And this class of proteins, we argued, would serve to pick up the copper from some import site and then protect it and guide it so it could collide and be inserted in the right protein. After all, if the cell is full of chelating agents that bind metals avidly, then those might actually represent a competitor for getting it the right metal in the right place. I told you about the regulatory roles. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this kind of a cartoon. The protein that Val declared and discovered as an antioxidant protein, ATX1, there's human forms of it that's present in yeast, and this is one of these small molecules that acts is to give the metal an address in the cell. And there's other classes that have been discovered, including copper chaperone for superoxide dismutase. Now, a number are known in bacterial systems as well. There are no good cases of a zinc chaperone that have yet been described. There are some great candidates for iron chaperones, and from the lab that look up here at NIH, you can see many of these great examples. So it's a very exciting time, and I say the ideas are still erupting in this field of metal trafficking. To make a long story short, the small diffusible protein picks up copper, and then it collides with a bigger protein that's bound to in a compartment, transfers the copper, and then hands it off from site to site, and so it's moved uphill thermodynamically into a specialized compartment where it can be put in copper-dependent enzymes. This is the Wilson disease protein in humans, and in yeast it's called CCC2. We worked out the chemistry a while back in collaboration with Amy Rosenzweig and with Ivano Bertini of how the two proteins would dock and exchange the metal, and through a series of bond-making arrangements steps never let that metal free in solution. This answered a major problem of control of vectorial diffusion, which facilitated by proteins that using electrostatic and protein-protein interactions could increase the residency time and lower the pathway, the energy barriers for a pathway for moving it from one site in a large cell to another. And so one of the drugs that has come out of these studies of how to control copper overload disease is tetravalmolate, and it is a simple drug that binds to copper through a pair of sulfurs. It's one of the best chelators that is metal-specific. We never see it really binding tightly to zinc or iron, but it's really have it binding to copper. And what we've shown is that, in fact, when you treat cells with this drug, it goes in, and then it traps the protein and it gathers it into a trimer. How does it do that? It actually traps 4 moles of copper and 3 moles of copper chaperones. It creates this iron-sulfur cluster-like entity, which looks quite confusing, but in fact is quite simple. This is the drug, and then each of these different parts of these different proteins, each is a different color, is a copper chaperone with a copper bound in its normal site. It's just that the copper also decides to bind to the drug, and the drug then organizes them around it. So this is a story that is ongoing. The compound is now in phase 3 studies for the treatment of Wilson's disease in Europe, and has now been approved in the U.S., not approved, but it's in the U.S. for clinical trials as well. I want to point out a variety of people contributed to this copper chaperone story. The most important is Val Collada. The collaboration was really extraordinary, as well as with Amy Rosenzweig, Lucia, and Ivano Bertini. And the paper that describes the drug interactions is here. These are the co-authors. Okay, so this has really been a setup to get to the last question. Think of this as the introduction's over, and I have now some observations that we don't fully understand, but they're pretty dramatic, and they have very important implications for fertility, but they also have implications in the whole field of cell cycle regulation. And that's this question of temporal fluxes as a regulatory, and metals as a regulatory switch, part of a regulatory switch. And I'm going to focus on the egg-oocyte transition, the meiotic maturation and meiotic cell cycle as the example of this. So I just want to remind you of the things we've talked about, that it's abundant, but it's limited, that cells maintain and control occupancy in metalloproteins that just don't pick up the metal whenever they need it. We still are learning the extent to which all these processes occur. Now I want to talk about this as a battleground, not in infectious disease, but more in developmental biology. So back to general chemistry for just a minute. Okay, so the periodic table is organized in this way to tell us something about the different chemistry of metals. The vast majority of the periodic table is metals. This part over here, all metals. Okay? The metals in the alkaline and alkaline earth families form only ionic bonds. And most biologists would say, yes, of course, there's inorganic signals that regulate cellular decisions. One of the best examples is calcium, where it forms only ionic bonds with proteins like calmodulin. And it organizes them, and they then serve as a second messenger. The other place where inorganic chemistry is really at the heart of most cellular regulatory pathways, one way or another, is through the attachment of a phosphorus. Now, phosphorus is in the main group, and it's a nonmetal, and so it forms strictly covalent bonds to other atoms. And that covalency allows the phosphate ion to stay intact, phosphorus with 4 oxygens. And in biology, we see that there are accessory enzymes that attach the phosphate to a site on the protein, serine or threonine, and changes conformation and its activity. Now, generally, transition metals have not been viewed as part of the signaling network. They are in between the main group and the alkaline earth metal, and their bonds have both ionic and covalent character. And so they form what we call coordination bonds, and what I'm going to do now is tell you that I think this is really a critical area emerging as a new set of regulatory targets and pathways. I'm going to focus on zinc, but many good cases can be made for copper have been made by Chris Chang, and also fluxes in iron are known to regulate a variety of protein degradation processes, cell death processes through things known as ferroptosis, etc. So I don't want to leave you thinking that zinc is the only one, but that's what I'm going to focus on the last few minutes here. Okay, so calcium, in order to be an ionic signal, it has to be pumped into a compartment, and then it has to be released on cue, and then its ions diffuse through the cell until they collide. The phosphate fluctuations in free phosphorus and phosphate ions don't change anything in the cell, but when an auxiliary enzyme comes and makes a covalent bond to a target, this purple target, it can then move the phosphate onto it. Now this is tagged and it has a different function. That's the phosphorylation process. The zinc chemistry really places it in between. I've already shown you that zinc sensors operate to turn on and off gene expression, and that they have extraordinary affinity. I've argued that there's no free zinc pool and a resin pool in a cell.